G'day, it's Dr. J, and welcome to Breakfast with Dr. J. Hope you're having a fantastic morning, and I wonder what you're getting up to on this beautiful Saturday. My goodness, in good old Sydney town, it's foggy. You look out the door there, and it's fog everywhere. You can't even see in front of you. So I wonder where you've been this morning. I went for a bit of a walk, got locked out of my unit. We had a bit of a problem with the key. So when you pop on, please say good morning, see how you're traveling, and it's always nice to get a few comments as we progress throughout our chit chat this morning. So I wonder what you've been up to. If you've actually had, let's say, lots of things going on in your life and everything becomes, how can we say, a big challenge. What we're going to talk about today is setting some things that make things really easy. And I call them having a BAM and setting benchmarks. When we get really busy doing stuff, what tends to happen is we get in the busy mode. I'm busy, but we don't have a measurable outcome. So what I want to do is share with you some little things and show you some tools this morning. It's not going to be very long, but I'm going to show you some things that will make a difference to your business and you personally, because if everything running well in your business, usually everything runs pretty well everywhere else. Or we hope so, don't we? All right, so when you pop on, say hi. I can't see who everyone is because I just get a little 1, 2, 3, or 10 in the little eye. But if you do say, I pop on, I'll wait for a few people to come on. I'll have a sip of my cup of coffee with Breakfast with Dr. J. Hope you're having one too. I love my cuppa in the morning. All right. Well, let's get cracking, and I get your trusty pen out because for those of you that watch on replay, I do suggest you take some notes. Sometimes you don't want to go back and listen to videos again if you've taken the time to listen to something. But one big rock here, and I want to see it's creating a benchmark or benchmarks plural and things called BAMs. These are really, really critical, and because ultimately I want to make sure that you've got some tools to take away, because ultimately if you've got these things in place, it makes life easier. Hi Selena, how you going? You too. Oh good. All right. First up, have you ever wondered why you can't increase your sales? Now we can have lots of blame games, but isn't it interesting in this day and age, we want to increase sales, increase profit, prices go up or we have higher expenses, and there's not much in business more sales can't fix. But sometimes we just are not making any more sales. Maybe it's the same, maybe it's going down. At the end of the month, we scratch our head and say, oh look, we've got to do more marketing, we've got to do more of this, we've got to, and all of a sudden there becomes a whole lot of stuff, but we're guessing. And when we guess, we sometimes get it wrong. I know, I do. Bet you do too. So you ever wonder why you're not getting next sales? Next thing I want to ask you is the big mistake is to measure just your sales and your income. I'll say that again. The big mistake is to measure your sales and income only. I have businesses that say how many sales you've got and how much income we create. They say we're using our KPIs. Guys, this is really not even 101. Now I know that's a bit harsh for Saturday morning, but if you just measure your sales and your income, you're not going to go anywhere. What you do need to do is to change what you're measuring. I'm not saying not to measure them. You've definitely got to measure them, but these are things that I'm going to show you this morning. You can't know what to improve unless you set a thing called benchmarks. Now, what are benchmarks? Benchmarks are numbers and percentages that you have to aspire to, which means if you actually achieve the benchmarks, you'll achieve your sales. If we don't have a target, we can't reach it, can we? But if you set your benchmarks, I'm just going to give you an example of some benchmarks. Here we go. Here we are. There's a series of some benchmarks. Now, as you can see, there are ranges for the benchmarks. I'm going to explain this to you because you know how many businesses I ask for their benchmarks and they say, oh, what's that? They give me the benchmark of number of sales they want, but that's just a target. So I want to show you how to do benchmarks because you've got to measure the activities to reach your target or your budget. I talk target because if we only go for budget, we usually fail. When we go for target, we should be 20% above budget. Budget should be 10% ROI in profit. Then you'll actually achieve budget most of the time. So let me give you some examples of this, because this is important. You need to aim for create a benchmark, because benchmarks will drive your business. Now, just give you a little head up here. If you want to set benchmarks, you've got to say, what do we do every day that needs to be measured? Now, choose the activities that must be done every day or every week, not monthly, yearly, quarterly. That's irrelevant. The activities, the sales activities. Now, we're just talking about sales here, guys. It's not a big business planning process, but this is a really important thing that many people don't do and don't have. So I thought I'd bring it up today. Now, you have to set standards, and I call them double NSs, not negotiable standards. Not negotiable standards are standards that must be achieved. I'm going to show you how to do this too. It's very easy. I'm going to give you some examples. Now, the activities and results that you set in your benchmarks are things such as, let me read these off to you. The first thing is the number of leads you need per week or per day. You need benchmarks. You must achieve them. It's not just we need leads. We need to know how many leads we need per week or per day, and then measure it and review it every month. That should be a benchmark, a thing that you are striving to achieve. So your targets have to be more than just sales. If you have targets that are just sales and don't have benchmarks that you measure, which are little mini targets, you're not going to achieve your sales. Now, once we've done this in lots of businesses, this is the Hawthorne principle, instantly people will then become accountable to the activities to reach the sales. Forget about sales and forget about the income right now. It's setting the benchmark. So let me give you some examples. Number of leads, dials per day, touching the telephone. How many? What's the minimum? What is the benchmark for your business? Could be 50 touches. Not contacts, not conversations, just dials. Next thing is contacts. Contacts is conversation. Some people don't understand what a contact is. It's called a conversation. You can't make sales without conversations, okay? So you need to have a minimum number of conversations. Contacts, a call to contact percentage. And I'm going to suggest you look at percentages here. And you can put numbers as well. Next thing is you want booked appointments. So contact to booked appointment percentage. You set a benchmark and a percentage. Now, we go to the next step. Appointments for each day. You need to have a benchmarks on what you need per day. And they need to be really set in stone. Yes, benchmarks aren't something, oh, we'll just make it a little bit less. And that's why we look at percentages instead of numbers. Percentages instead of just numbers, and there will be some numbers and number of leads, but at the end of the day, most of the time a benchmark is a percentage. The why it's a percentage, because you can actually have variance in the numbers. Okay, next couple of things. You can actually set other benchmarks, such as average yield. What's the benchmark? Well, we want to have a benchmark of having $1,000 to $2,000 in our sales. We don't want the $10 sales, because that's not a sale. So we set a benchmark. Now, if you measure these benchmarks, it is recommended you do this daily. Now, I'm going to show you that sheet again. As you can see on this sheet, there's a benchmark. And let me just read it. You probably it's a little bit far away for you. I'll just give you an example. Contact to booked appointment percentage. In other words, conversation to booked appointments, 60 to 80%. Now, why do I have a range? Because a range should be an absolute minimum 60%, ideally 80%. So a lot of people have a benchmark which is just one percentage, 80%. That should be 80%. I disagree. You should have an absolute minimum and your absolute ideal or more. That's a benchmark. We could always go higher. So have a minimum benchmark Let's do another one. Booked appointment to show percentage. So have a booked appointment that shows. I recommend that you'd have a 60 to 80% benchmark. Minimum, absolute minimum. 60%. If you continually be under benchmark, take them off the phone, do some training. Yeah. Because if you don't measure those benchmarks on a regular basis and people falling underneath the benchmarks, that's going to cost you money. It also puts the salesperson under duress because they're underperforming, which means that they won't get the outcome you want. And secondly, they'll be disheartened. I'll give you another example. Let's say you have a business where people walk into. They just walk in. Well, you want to have a walk-in to sell percentage of, let's say, 60 to 80%. Then you have a business that has, they never buy on the day. It's always got to fill out some paperwork, contracts, and so forth. That's called an NSR, no sell but returning the paperwork or returning to buy. Now, you might set a benchmark of people that go away and come back at 30 to 50%. If you've got a business that actually people could buy on the day, you'd have a 30 to 50% be-back percentage. But if you don't measure, you don't have a benchmark and you have lots of be-backs and you say, well, how many came back or not many, that's not a sales management or sales motivation tool. You must set those benchmarks. Here's a couple of other ones. Lead to sale percentage, a benchmark. In other words, I get a lead and a sale. So that means we've called, contacted, booked an appointment, they've come in, they've been toured, demmed, and closed, which means lead to sale. Now, if you've got a very low lead to sale percentage, some of those activities aren't being done. Or they've been done poorly and they need some training. So I recommend you sit down and you say, what sorts of things do we need to do? Do we have a presentation and a close? That would be a tour or dem to sell percentage. What would be the benchmark we would require for someone to be successful in our business? For example here, I've got down here a tour or demonstration. In other words, you present your prices to sell percentage at 65 to 75%. See, there's a 10% range. Now, my ranges, I recommend they should be between 20 to 10%. Absolute minimum to the ideal. And obviously, you want to go above benchmarks, obviously. But that's a guide. If you don't have a benchmark and you don't do the training to get that, guess what happens? Salespeople get despondent, bosses get frustrated, and we don't achieve. And if you have massive achievements and you're not comparing them to benchmarks, you can't replicate it. Well, if you don't have a great month or so forth, say, oh my goodness, we just have a terrific month. Guess what? How can you replicate it if you aren't measuring your benchmark? So you've got to go to benchmarks. And by the way, I'll tell you why we have to review benchmarks in a moment. So if you measure and review the benchmarks and look at them and look at your numbers daily, don't just look at the numbers every day, compare them to the benchmark. If you've got a show rate of 45%, but your benchmark is 60 to 80%, there's the standard. So you're setting the standard. Now, please take this down. You set the standard to the benchmark. 60 to 80%, if you're 43%, a little bit of training. Now, that might not be for one day or 1 week, and all of a sudden you're not going to say, oh, the wheels have fallen off. But it's consistently under benchmark. That's an absolute red flag to be able to do some training, take the person away, have a listen to some of their calls or whatever it may be, their presentation, their close, whatever it is, and fix it. No salesperson wants to fail. So if you're actually a person that's on the good to go, so push you to get out there. So, hey, Dee, good to see you. And Daniela, thank you so much for that wonderful email, my friend. That was terrific. Oh, my goodness. You put a big smile on my face. All right. And Pele, yes, you're absolutely right, mate. You can't manage what you don't measure. You're spot on, my friend. Oh, we got some superstars on this morning. Gee, we got the best of the best on this morning. Good grief. I'm sure we're on the same page. Give me a couple of thumbs up if we're on the same page. But you might know this, but are you actually doing it still? Sometimes when we get busy, everything's all over the place. Sometimes it's tough. But if you have this little sheet of benchmarks and we're measuring our numbers, some people measure numbers every day, but they don't measure it to a benchmark. Well, what a waste of time. Waste of time. No, you've got an 80% close rate, but you're getting grumpy because he's on a 60, but he doesn't know the benchmarks or hasn't been reminded of them. So you set these benchmarks. And now, have a minimum and an ideal. So just recap. In this busy world that we're in at the moment, we sometimes get sidetracked, and ideally what we want to do is to be able to settle down and make sure we achieve our target. So the thing I was talking about before is to set your benchmarks, and making sure if you want to increase your sales, you've got to measure the activity. Don't measure just sales, and making sure the yield's measured. It's a big mistake. Just explained a few moments ago on how to set your benchmarks to drive your success. If you set those benchmarks with an absolute minimum to an ideal and measure them on a daily basis, I recommend they should be around about 10 max. Yeah, don't go over the top. I know some people measure 6, but have a range. Now, the next thing is, I want to talk about a word that we use in the Sales Authority Club and in-house training. A lot of you guys I've trained with for many, many years. Hello, Marie. How you going? Lovely to see you. My goodness gracious. I want to just talk about a thing that we talk about. And for those, most of all you guys we've worked with, and I'm just going to remind you of a word. It's called BAM. It's not from Fred Flintstone, Bam Bam. It's called a bare-ass minimum. I know it's a bit cheeky, but you got to have bare-ass minimums. Bare-ass minimum, we call it, this is your BAM. This must be achieved. And this is actually what you have to understand. Minimum number of contacts, number of appointments, number, minimum number of sales, number, minimum yield, number. But then we have our benchmarks. We need to achieve our BAM in our benchmarks. Minimum number, 60%. It's a BAM. That small number over here, that number down here, that's a BAM. That's an acceptable standard. The standard you accept becomes the standard. What you accept becomes the standard. So you must set your BAMs. If you don't have 5 contacts a day and that's your BAM, and you've only done 4, you keep making the calls to make your BAM. BAMs and benchmarks, it's a big B morning, isn't it? Need to go hand in hand. Yes, bam, boom. But people don't do this. They don't have their benchmarks. They don't have their BAM. So BAMs and benchmarks go together. So if you put your BAMs together, what happens is you then have standards. And they are called not negotiable standards. Remember I've said that before. We have the double NS's, not negotiable standards. So you set your benchmarks and then you have your activity. You measure activity to your benchmarks. Now, a lot of people, when I ask this question, they say yes. And I say, show me your benchmarks. They're not written down. Guys, I recommend that you write these benchmarks down and you revise them with yourself if you're a solo warrior. But if it's with your team, remind them what the benchmarks are. Show them what a BAM is and show them what BAMs they have. Dials per day could be 1. Contacts per day, more important. And then contacts, well, conversations, but if you're not booking an appointment or making a sale, you got a problem. What is the minimum number? What is the BAM? And if they do a conversation to booked appointment, well, what's the percentage? No, it's 50%. Well, our benchmarks is 60 to 80%, Steve. What can we do to get it up to 60%? Your minimum, your BAM. Okay. If this is resonating with you, please, I know it's a reminder for lots, but I've just found in the last 2 to 3 weeks, I've asked about benchmarks and BAMs, and they've just gone by the wayside because everyone's busy doing other things and then worrying about their sales. We can get rid of all the noise if we just sit down and get our benchmarks done and have a BAM. Again, I'll show you again. Repetition is the mother of learning and skill. There's got to be a minimum percentage. There's got to be the number you measure daily and weekly. If it's under the standard, you've got to talk about it. Do not accept it. If someone's got to make 3 bookings a day and they've only booked 1, you have to care enough to say, hey, what happened? If they have a skills problem, you need to fix it. That's your job as a leader. And if you're a solo warrior, you put your hand up for help. You give me a call, or, if you're in the Sales Authority club, we do lots of training. We do catch-ups regularly, every week. Guys, I cannot stress this enough. This is a big rock. Now, if you actually measure your BAMs, this is what you need to do with them. You need to acknowledge improvement. Let's say Steve's at 43%, but the benchmark is 60, and that's the BAM. And then he goes to 50. Acknowledge an improvement. It allows, and it's just such a simple thing. But if you care enough to measure it and there's an improvement, tell the person. They might say, yeah, no. But you know what? It makes a difference. And by the way, if you are a solo warrior, tell someone, because it's important. And as we progressively get better, that ticks the box off of improvement. Driving to a BAM.